He was, when the light came on, you felt you were somebody important. He never made you a little guy. In New York, I first went on The Tonight Show.
It all began with two shocking words. When Don Rickles first stepped onto The Tonight Show stage in 1965, he looked Johnny Carson in the eye and said, "Hello, dummy." That daring insult sparked laughter, but also a controversy that grew into a complicated bond.
To you young people, to you elders, Johnny Carson was the lifeline of Nightline and the master of what he did.
And before his death, Rickles revealed the truth about Carson that no one expected. The Tonight Show era, where Rickles meets Carson. In 1965, Don Rickles walked onto the set of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson for the very first time. Johnny Carson had already been hosting since 1962 and was becoming the most powerful figure in late-night television. The audience expected another guest to sit politely, exchange jokes, and let Carson control the rhythm of the conversation. What they got instead was something that would change television history. The moment Rickles stepped into the spotlight, he looked Carson straight in the eye and said, "Hello, dummy." For a split second, there was silence in the studio. No one had ever spoken to Carson that way on his own show. But then the room erupted with laughter. Rickles had broken the invisible wall of politeness that surrounded late-night interviews, and he did it without hesitation. Not stopping there, he delivered another line that shocked the crowd even more. He joked, "You're making $50 million a year, and your poor parents are back in Nebraska eating locusts for dinner." The audience howled, and even Carson, who was usually the master of composure, cracked a smile. That moment set the tone for their relationship. Rickles was not there to play it safe. He was there to roast the host in front of millions of viewers, and somehow he made it work. This opening exchange was more than just a funny moment. It was a shift in the way comedy could play out on television. Rickles showed that insult humor, which had mostly lived in smoky nightclubs and Las Vegas lounges, could capture a mainstream audience. His boldness brought an unpredictable energy to a medium that often played by strict rules. What could have easily been seen as disrespect became pure entertainment. Executives at NBC took notice. They realized that Rickles had something no one else could replicate. His ability to poke fun at Carson, the king of late night, and get away with it made him a valuable guest who could spike ratings every time he appeared. Producers began inviting him back, and before long, Rickles became a regular face on the show. Each visit carried the same unpredictability. The audience never knew what he would say, and Carson never knew how far he might push the insult, but the chemistry was undeniable. That first meeting in 1965 marked the beginning of one of television's most memorable comedic pairings. Rickles had found a stage big enough for his sharp wit, and Carson had found a guest who could shake him out of his calm, polished routine. But before that electrifying night, Rickles had already lived a life full of struggle, ambition, and small victories. Let's tell you, how did those early years prepare him for that explosive greeting? The making of Don Rickles. Don Rickles was born on May 8, 1926, in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York. His father, Max, had emigrated from what is now Lithuania, while his mother, Etta, was born in New York to Austrian parents. Growing up in a Jewish household, Rickles was surrounded by Yiddish language and traditions. That cultural background shaped his humor and gave him a sharp, quick wit that would later make him famous. Like many young men of his generation, Rickles' life was interrupted by war. In 1944, right after finishing high school, he joined the U.S. Navy. He served during World War II until his discharge in 1946. Though he never saw combat directly, the discipline and camaraderie of military life left an impression on him. He often said that his time in the Navy gave him perspective and the courage to pursue what he truly wanted when he returned home. What he wanted most was to be an actor. After the war, Rickles enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. He graduated around 1948 with hopes of dramatic roles in film and television, but the reality was harsh. Acting jobs were scarce, and rejection became a daily part of his life. To make ends meet, he worked odd jobs and performed wherever he could, from bingo halls to churches and small community events. It was during these early performances that Rickles stumbled upon the secret to his future success. When hecklers interrupted his act one night, he snapped back with quick insults. Instead of offending the crowd, the audience burst into laughter. Rickles realized that roasting the people around him created more energy than telling prepared jokes. What started as a spontaneous reaction soon became his signature style of insult comedy. His real breakthrough came in 1957 in Miami Beach. Frank Sinatra walked into the nightclub where Rickles was performing. Most young comics would have been intimidated, but Rickles did the opposite. He looked at Sinatra and quipped, "I saw your movie. The Cannon's acting was great." The audience gasped, waiting for Sinatra's reaction. To everyone's relief, Sinatra laughed, and from that night on, he became one of Rickles' biggest supporters. With Sinatra's backing, Rickles entered the glamorous orbit of the Rat Pack and the Las Vegas Strip. By 1959, he was performing at top venues like the Sahara. His albums Hello Dummy in 1968 and Don Rickles Speaks in 1969 spread his brand of comedy even further. He also became a regular on television, starring in CPO Sharkey and appearing on the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast. His run-ins with Carson, including the infamous cigarette box incident, added to his legend. Yet beneath the laughter and spotlight, Rickles carried wounds and struggles that quietly shaped the course of his life in ways no audience could imagine. Rickles' private life. In 1965, Don Rickles married Barbara Sklar, the woman he often called his anchor. Their marriage would last more than 50 years, a rare feat in the unpredictable world of show business. While Rickles spent his nights on stage and in front of cameras, Barbara gave him a home that was steady and safe. She kept him grounded when the spotlight became too bright and the pressures of fame threatened to overwhelm him. Together, they raised 2 children, Mindy and Larry. Mindy inherited her father's sharp sense of humor, but chose to follow her own path in comedy. She often spoke of her father with warmth, describing him as deeply loving yet emotionally guarded. To the world, Don was bold, fearless, and quick with a biting insult. At home, he was quieter, sometimes struggling to express his feelings. But Mindy always insisted that behind his guarded nature was a devoted husband and father who cared deeply for his family. Larry, on the other hand, chose a career behind the scenes. He became a writer and producer and earned wide respect in the industry. His proudest achievement came in 2007 when he won an Emmy for Mr. Warmth, the Don Rickles Project, a documentary that celebrated his father's life and career. Don was overwhelmed with pride, saying his son's success meant more to him than his own accolades. But in 2011, tragedy struck. Larry died suddenly from pneumonia at just 41 years old. The loss shattered Rickles. Friends noticed a change in him afterward. He still performed, still joked, but his humor carried a weight it had never carried before. Adding to his private struggles were whispers about complicated feelings toward Frank Sinatra and private opinions about Marilyn Monroe's treatment in Hollywood. These hidden thoughts revealed that even a man who brought joy to millions lived with shadows few ever saw. While Rickles balanced joy and heartbreak, it is time to return to his fateful meeting with Johnny Carson and uncover how Carson's own life was far more complicated than the bright lights suggested. Carson's private demons. Johnny Carson was the king of late-night television. Night after night, he appeared calm, witty, and perfectly in control. He made millions laugh, and for 30 years, he was America's companion before bedtime. But behind that polished image was a man whose private life was often stormy and fragile. Carson was married 4 times. His first marriage was to Joan Jody Woolcott in 1949. Together, they had 3 sons, and at first, the marriage seemed stable. Yet Carson's long hours and rising career took a toll. By 1963, the relationship had collapsed, leaving scars not only on Jody but also on the children. That same year, Carson married Joanne Copeland. She was glamorous and stood by his side through some of his biggest successes. But behind the curtain, the problems were similar. Carson's drinking, temper, and constant workload strained their bond. Their union lasted until 1972. Not long after, Carson married model Joanna Holland. The marriage began in a burst of romance, but quickly fell into the same cycle of charm, conflict, and distance. By 1985, they too were divorced. Carson's final marriage came in 1987 to Alexis Moss. Unlike his earlier relationships, this one lasted until his death, but it remained intensely private, with Carson withdrawing more and more from public life. His family life carried heavy tragedy. In 1991, his son Rick died in a car accident at the age of 39. Carson chose not to attend the funeral, explaining that his presence would turn a personal moment into a media frenzy. That decision shocked many and revealed the painful divide between his public duties and private grief. His relationships with his other sons were also strained. The demands of hosting The Tonight Show often left little space for intimacy at home. The contradiction between Carson's public image and private self was striking. On television, he was the perfect straight man, the anchor who allowed comedians like Don Rickles to shine. Off camera, he was reserved, cautious, and sometimes emotionally distant. Friends and colleagues often described him as sensitive yet hard to reach, a man who built walls around himself even as he entertained millions. As Carson's internal pressures built, his rapport with Rickles would be tested not just as comedic partners, but as two men carrying burdens no audience could see. Those private demons would eventually bleed into their relationship, leading to betrayal and bitterness. Rickles' fallout with Carson. By the time Carson prepared to retire in 1992, Rickles believed he had earned more than just a guest seat. Rickles reportedly thought he might be considered as Carson's successor. After all, he had been one of the most recognizable and popular guests on the show, appearing more than 100 times. His banter with Carson was legendary, and fans believed no one else could match that energy. Rickles imagined that years of loyalty and performance would count for something, if not the host's chair itself, then at least serious support from Carson in shaping the show's future. But when Carson stepped down, NBC executives had other plans. They handed the desk to Jay Leno, a younger comedian with a safer style who appealed to middle America. Leno was steady, reliable, and seen as a ratings guarantee. In the eyes of the network, Rickles' biting humor was too risky for the new era of late-night television. To Rickles, the decision was not just a professional disappointment, it felt like betrayal. He believed Carson had hinted at possibilities, even encouraged him to hope, only to let him down when the time came. Friends recalled that Rickles often accused Carson of misleading him, calling him a liar in private moments of frustration. Their bond, once central to late-night comedy, fractured in ways the public never saw. In front of cameras, Rickles kept the act alive. He continued to joke about Carson, teasing him as he always had. But the warmth behind the laughter had cooled. Offstage, he carried a resentment that never fully left him. To Rickles, their friendship had been more performance than reality, built for the stage rather than for life. The media described the situation as one of many power struggles in the world of late-night television, but for Rickles it was deeply personal. Carson's decision to walk away without lifting him higher left a wound that time did not heal. As Carson faded from the spotlight into retirement, Rickles carried unresolved bitterness that would resurface at Carson's death. When Carson left, he left behind not only a void in show business, but also questions that for Rickles would never be answered. The end of an era with Carson's death. When Johnny Carson signed off from The Tonight Show in 1992, he left television with grace and dignity. For 3 decades, he had been the man who shaped late-night comedy, the host who made America laugh before bed. After retirement, Carson chose silence. He rarely appeared in public, almost vanishing from the world of television. For many, it felt as though he had stepped into the shadows, leaving only memories of his presence on screen. That silence was broken on January 23, 2005, when the news spread that Johnny Carson had died at the age of 79 from complications of emphysema. The announcement sent shockwaves across the entertainment world. Even though he had been off television for more than a decade, his influence lingered so strongly that his death felt like the closing of an entire cultural chapter. Late night, as people knew it, truly belonged to him. The mourning was immediate and widespread. Fans, comedians, and public figures all paid tribute, remembering Carson as the gold standard of late-night television. He was not just a host, He was an institution. Generations of viewers had grown up with his monologues, his sketches, and his unique ability to bring out the best in his guests. For many, he was the very definition of what a television host should be. The following night, Jay Leno dedicated The Tonight Show to Carson. Sitting in the chair he had inherited, Leno stepped aside from his usual format to honor the man who had built the stage he stood on. Ed McMahon, Carson's loyal sidekick, joined in remembrance. Bob Newhart, another comedy legend, shared memories. And Don Rickles was there too, the man who had sparred with Carson on air for decades. Rickles spoke with a mixture of warmth and honesty. He called Carson the best straight man a comedian could ever hope for, and described him as a complicated genius. His words carried weight because Rickles never sugarcoated. He acknowledged Carson's brilliance, but also hinted at the distance and difficulty that marked their relationship offstage. The tribute was not polished nostalgia, but a reflection of a man who had meant both partnership and pain in his life. Carson's death was more than the passing of a television star. It was the end of an era that had defined American comedy, and for Rickles, it was personal. For Rickles, Carson's passing wasn't just the end of an era. It forced him to confront his own mortality and the legacy he would one day leave behind. Rickles' final reflections and legacy. In his later years, Don Rickles often reflected on his long history with Johnny Carson. He never sugarcoated the truth. With his usual bluntness, Rickles would say, "Johnny was the best straight man a comedian could ever hope for." That single line summed up how he viewed Carson's role in their legendary partnership. Carson had been calm, steady, and perfectly timed, the kind of host who could set up a punchline without even trying. Rickles knew he owed much of his own success on television to that dynamic. Yet Rickles was also quick to remind people that what they saw on screen was not the whole story. Offstage, Johnny wasn't the guy you thought you knew, Rickles once said. He could be distant, he could be cold, but when that red light went on, he was magic. For Rickles, this divide between the private man and the public star explained much of the mystery around Carson. He respected him deeply, but understood that their bond was built for television more than for private life. When Carson passed away in 2005, Rickles' reflections were softened by time. He chose to focus on Carson's brilliance rather than on old wounds. In a heartfelt tribute, he described Carson as a complicated genius. Those three words carried both admiration and honesty. Rickles would not erase the tensions, but he also would not deny that Carson had been central to his career and to American comedy. Even near the end of his own life, Rickles joked about the way he had spent decades calling Carson dummy. He admitted, though, that beneath the insult was a kind of affection that audiences might not have seen. "We made history together," Rickles said. That was his way of acknowledging that whatever bitterness had existed, their partnership had left a mark that would never fade. Rickles understood that comedy is often built on contradictions. Carson was adored on screen but struggled in private. Rickles mocked everyone with fearless insults, yet in his own family life, he sometimes found it hard to express emotions. Together, they represented the strange balance between laughter and pain that defines so much of entertainment. "I made a career out of calling him dummy," Rickles once said. But the truth is, Johnny Carson was one of a kind. Don Rickles died on April 6, 2017, in Los Angeles at the age of 90. His death closed the book on one of the sharpest voices in comedy, yet his influence lives on. And that brings us to the end of this story. What do you think? Was Don Rickles justified in feeling betrayed by Johnny Carson? Or was it just the reality of show business? Share your thoughts in the comments. Also, you can like and share this video. Do well to subscribe to this channel. Before you go, click on the video displayed on your screen.